Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Harley Sugarman, founder and CEO of Anagram, a human-driven security platform that's raised $10 million in funding. Harley, what's going on?
It's good to be here. No, it's nice to meet you. Things are good.
With a name like Harley Sugarman, I feel like you're just destined to achieve amazing things in life. There's no way that you don't do anything epic with a name like that.
It was a very rough childhood when, Harley Sugarman was such a weird name that I struggled in the early days. I hated the name. But I feel like when I hit my mid-20s, it kind of came into its own, and now I love it. I wish I could say I was named after the motorbike. Very small side story. I was named after an accountant named Harley, which is way less exciting than what everybody assumes.
What was amazing about this accountant? That sounds very random. Did you save your parents like a boatload of money or something?
I have no idea. The only thing I know is that there was an accountant in the UK in the 70s or in the 80s called Harley. And they were like, we like that name. And I was going to be Harley if I were a boy or a girl. So it was predestined. This accountant has had an unknowingly large impact on my life.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's a great name. As I was preparing for this interview, looking at your bio, I see that you've listed a bunch of different job titles that you've had. I'd love to spend a little bit of time just focusing on the most recent title you had before founder and CEO. You're an investor. What was it like when you were an investor, and what made you decide to cross sides and go build something yourself?
So I was always sort of fascinated by the idea of starting a company. I come from a family where everybody has always sort of put starting a company on a pedestal. My dad was an entrepreneur. My brothers are entrepreneurs. And, I went to university out in the Bay Area where, kind of when the movie The Social Network came out. So it had just all of a sudden gained this like glamour to it. And I actually right out of high school thought I was going to go into the film industry. I really loved writing and creating short films and music videos, and went into college sort of with that mindset, but quite quickly learned that there was a lot of overlap, a weird amount of overlap between entrepreneurship and starting a business and the film industry, in the sense that you there's often a lot of, you're building something from nothing, right? Like you're starting with a blank screen. And in a movie's case, you might be writing a script, you might be pulling together the people to create that film, you might be raising money, and hopefully at the end you have something people enjoy and people love. And it's a lot of the same steps in starting a company. You have an idea and you have a blank screen, and you have to build something and build the team to make it work and figure out how to sell it and who's going to buy it. And at the end of it, hopefully you have something people love. So for me, that was always like, there was this kind of interesting overlap from the very beginning of the film industry and entrepreneurship. There was obviously a much clearer path to making money in the entrepreneurship lane than in the film industry lane. And so right out of college, I studied engineering and became a software engineer for a while, with an ear or an eye towards, I want to go and start a company. And after being an engineer for a few years, I sort of realized that the thing that was missing from my skill set was basically everything outside of the product building elements of starting a company. How do you build a team? How do you think about fundraising? How do you create a culture that you can get people aligned on this vision of the future? And so VC was a very natural place for me to learn a lot of those things. So for me, I was at Bloomberg. I was fairly lucky in that Bloomberg has a very early stage VC firm as part of it, Bloomberg Beta, and they were very focused on the stuff I was interested in around the future of work, and a lot of stuff around developer tooling and cybersecurity, which was my sort of background and specialty. And so I reached out to one of the partners there, a woman named Karen Klein, and said, hey, I'd love to work for you, but I want you to fire me in 2 years so that I go and start a company. And she said yes. And so that was kind of what led me into VC. And then, eventually after a couple of years into Anagram.
So I have to imagine that as you're going through that 2 years, you're just looking for the big opportunity, looking for the problem to solve. Obviously, you settled on security awareness training. Why'd you end up there? What was it about this market and this category that made you say, yep, that's it. Out of all of the ideas, this is the one I'm going to go pursue?
So within security, let me actually take a step back. I always loved security as a space. I was a software engineer, but my focus at school was on security engineering. I thought it was really interesting. I did a lot of security work and infrastructure work while I was an engineer at Bloomberg. And I was looking at the state of security tooling, generally speaking. And the one domain that was continually underserved and continually just really poorly managed and thought about in terms of technology was security awareness. And to me, that was really interesting because there was this disparity between what CISOs will, and a CISO is a chief information security officer, what a CISO would say is their biggest vulnerability. If you ask 100 CISOs, probably 90 to 95 of them, if you're asking them, where is an attack going to come from? Like, what is going to be the root cause of a breach if it happens to us? They're almost always going to say, most likely it's going to be one of my people. They're going to click on a phishing link. They're going to set up a tool incorrectly. They're going to leave a password, the default password, so you can kind of guess, how to log in. And at the same time, if you look at how they're addressing that big risk, you've got this really dreadful set of tooling that is typically an annual piece of training. Maybe it's a video, maybe it's multiple videos, followed by SAT style reading comprehension quizzes right afterwards. And, obviously that's not going to work, right? Like if we taught school kids that way, in the way that we expect adults to learn security awareness training, within about 3 weeks, there would be riots. It would just not fly. People would, there'd be outroar because of course that system of teaching doesn't work. But that has been the state of this industry for 20 plus years. And so to me, that was just a really interesting space. And as I started asking questions about it and digging into it a little bit more, I kind of kept getting the same answers from CISOs, which was, oh, well, you can't fix, humans are always going to be humans. We need to check our compliance checkbox, and this is an easy way for us to do it. And no one was looking at it through the lens of behavior change and how do humans interact with technology? How do they build habits? How do they think about, should I make this decision or should I not make this decision? And so that was the lens that we started with. It was, okay, if we ignored all the prior art in this space and thought about developing security awareness training from the ground up, what would it look like? And that was the spark that led to the inside of the product.
Why does security awareness training suck so bad? So as you just described, CISOs are very aware that the humans are the major risk there. But when it comes to the, kind of status quo of security awareness training, it sucks. It's boring. It just feels like something that's very, very old school. How come no one else has modernized this and brought change to this space? Like, why is this status quo?
That is a great question. I think that this space really only came into its own about 20, 25 years ago. And the sort of big incumbent in our space is a company called KnowBe4. And they were the first to really build out security awareness programs in a formalized way. And over the past sort of 15, 20 years, other people came into the space and the technology just sort of got commoditized down. And you got into this like vicious cycle of tooling and spend on tooling where this training was dreadful, so it didn't actually make a difference. And so CISOs said, well, I just need to check the box and buy this software as effectively, as cheaply and quickly as I can, which then led to basically a lack of innovation and a little bit of just sense of hopelessness among the vendors in the space that they could make a difference. And there were, marginal innovations there. There were phishing simulations that came around. And so companies will now send you fake phishing emails. And if they trick you, then you get a little notification that said, hey, clicked on this, you shouldn't have done. Maybe they give you more training. And then, now there's a lot of stuff around AI and like having those phishing simulations written by AI or having video content that's been generated by AI. And, again, these are kind of incremental improvements, but they are not fundamentally addressing the core issue of behavior change. And so I think for me, there's been no innovation in this space because no one has taken a step back and looked at what is the problem that we are trying to solve here. And instead, they've just taken the incumbent solutions and sort of layered different technologies or layered AI on top of it. And as long as that's the approach that you're taking, you are fundamentally never going to be able to change behavior. And if that's the case, CISOs behaving very rationally in not wanting to spend money here. Like, they are making smart decisions. But the problem is, given the current state of the art, there is no reason for them to make a different decision. And I think it just sort of became a little bit of a vicious cycle, and no one's really been able to innovate in a particularly interesting way. What has changed over the past handful of months is a couple of things. The first is the fact that we can now personalize and create individualized training in a way that we never could before. And AI is a big factor of that. It's not the only factor, but it does help. Yeah, it's very good at contextualizing decision making and being able to say, given this set of inputs, what should the next output be? And so as we think about the product we're building, we try and incorporate that into the training that we put out. But also as we look to the future and as we look to the features that we're building, one of the things we're trying to reinvent is, how do you train a user? Do you have to give them these modules once a year? Do you have to send them these phishing simulations? Or can you, in the moment, look at the context of what they're doing and give them feedback and say, hey, this email maybe is a little bit funky. You should double check on this request before you fill it. Or, hey, before you hit enter sending this information to ChatGPT, maybe anonymize this piece of information first. And so being able to look at this stuff a little bit more contextually, I think, is one big innovation that's going to lead to a lot of, improvement in the space. And then the other is just this idea that these attackers are getting more and more sophisticated. AI, as much as I think, it improves the status and the state of a lot of security tooling on the defender's side. The way that someone described this to me is AI is like a big wooden club for the defenders, but it's like a machine gun for the attackers. The way that you can use this technology offensively is so much more impressive than what we are currently doing defensively. And so all of a sudden, let's use email as an example. The number of phishing emails that an attacker can send and the quality of those emails has just changed dramatically. Now, all of a sudden, I can generate 1,000 fully personalized phishing emails going to 1,000 different employees that are personalized based on what I can find on LinkedIn, that are personalized based on what their job title is and based on their geography. And I can do that with the click of a button and a language model. And I think a lot of the existing incumbents, not just in security awareness, but security tooling generally, the email security gateways, those sorts of companies are going to find it a lot more difficult to detect and prevent those emails from getting into a user's inbox. And so I think what that means is the human ends up becoming a much more important piece of an organization's defense. You can't rely on your tools to catch everything now, because what the surface area of what they have to detect is just so much greater. And it's a really difficult problem to successfully be able to detect all of those things. And so training has to get more important. And I think that that's why when we've gone out to a lot of customers, there's been this appetite to switch away from something that is just one size fits all. Here's some out of the box videos and puzzles, and shift towards a much more interactive, much more engaging, much more real time form of training.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. And is that how you think about it? Is it, just-in-time training, and that's kind of the difference for, more static training? Or how do you think about the difference between the old way and the new way that you're pushing?
I think the new way is going to have a few things. The new way is going to have very personalized training that is targeted towards a specific user, their specific roles, and the tools and the threats that they are exposed to. So not one size fits all. Because what a developer sees and the kinds of attacks that a developer is exposed to is super different than what someone on the legal team sees, or what someone on, we work with a few retail companies, what someone in their store will see. So I think hyper-personalization is going to be huge. I think outside of that, making sure when you do have simulations or more interactive training, making sure that it is more true to life and to the things that they are going to interact with day in, day out. So instead of what you typically see, which is a video followed by some comprehension questions that basically tested if you were paying attention to the thing that you probably weren't paying attention to, we focus on what we're calling puzzle-based learning. So actually giving users little micro examples of the kind of thing that they are interacting with day in and day out, and having them shift mindset and think about things through the lens of an attacker. Within security, there's this idea of capture the flag, like this culture of CTF competitions. And a lot of the inspiration for our initial product actually came from that. This idea of like, hey, put yourself in the shoes of the attacker, try and break this system. Think about how you would get tricked by this system. And that just makes a huge difference in terms of how people absorb the information and how they change it. And then the third piece is, as you said, is how do you get in the moment training, right? Some people call it just in time. I sort of call it in the moment. And what I mean by that is not what just in time training has been up to this point, which is we are going to send you a Slack notification every week with a 30-second video, or, oh, you clicked on a phishing email. Here's a follow-up email that tells you about the thing that you just clicked. But actually looking at the user's workflow and proactively nudging them in the right direction. Again, we don't really want to be a blocker. Like if the analogy I use is Grammarly, not Clippy, we want to be in the user's workflow, but in a very sort of subtle and thoughtful way, as opposed to, hey, here's a big red X, don't do this, and then getting into a user's way, right? Because ultimately security is a cost center, not a revenue center. And people just want to do their jobs. They need to make their company money. So we have to be able to work in the flow of that.
Whenever there's, the dynamic of an old way and a new way, the new way obviously comes with a lot of evangelism, and it requires a lot of evangelism. What are you doing to evangelize this new way and get people nodding their heads to, yes, Harley, he gets it. He understands this problem. He understands how to build a solution.
I think the thing that has been the most impactful for us has been the data. If you look at most security awareness or human risk management tools right now, the data that they give you is either useless or not very actionable, right? I think oftentimes what you look at right now is click rate, how many people are clicking on these phishing simulations. Maybe if you're a bit more sophisticated, you'll look at how many incidents do we have that were caused by risk X, Y, or Z. What we're able to show is when you do introduce training that works to our format, and when you do introduce this idea of just-in-time sort of interactive training that requires critical thinking, you actually see those numbers change really, really dramatically. Most times when companies show, their phishing click rate, how many of my users click on a phishing email, those numbers are very stagnant, or they're very easily manipulated where, I know a CISO where they told me, hey, at the beginning of the year, I sent a really difficult campaign, so I knew I would have a really high click rate. And then in March, I sent one that was a little bit easier. And then in June, I sent one that was a little bit easier. And then in October, and all of a sudden, that CISO is now saying, oh, look, my click rate is going down. How good a job I'm doing. And so, for us, we are very, very insistent on looking at the data, showing customers, hey, before you introduced us, this is the number of incidents you were seeing. After you introduced us, this is the number of incidents you're seeing. And I think that's ultimately the thing that changes minds. Outside of that, I think the way that we talk about this space needs to change. The big sort of buzzword in our space, or, what was security awareness training about 4 or 5 years ago became human risk management. And that was sort of the rebrand that was supposed to bring everything much more data-driven, that was supposed to bring a lot more transparency to it. And, I think the problem is twofold. One is that a lot of these platforms ended up doing was just plugging into different data sources and saying, oh, well, here are your riskiest users, and you should do special training for those users. And most CISOs know who their riskiest users are. Like they didn't need a tool to tell them that. And oftentimes the tool would like plug in and give them incorrect information, because it's also quite difficult to understand what a risky user looks like when you get to a certain scale of company, because a bank's risky user might be going to look very different than a social media company's risky user. But a lot of the industry sort of shifted towards this framing of like, okay, we are going to mitigate the risk of your humans. And I hate that framing so much, because it puts the onus on the human, right? It sees humans as risks to be mitigated. And what I have been trying to frame our company around is this idea of human-driven security, which is let's actually take humans and make them a line of defense. Let's take them and teach them how to spot respond to these kinds of threats in a way that, none of the incumbents are really thinking about. And for me, that's the only way that you're going to see this mindset shift. And I think it's inevitable. I mean, I think within 5 years, everybody will start thinking about it in this way, because I just don't think you'll be able not to, given the level of sophistication of the attackers.
Have you seen any pushback from people who are, very content with the old way? When it comes to this new way, the vision that you have, human-driven security, is there anyone that you've seen who's like, no, that's not possible. That can't be the case?
All the time. I mean, I would say that is probably the biggest challenge that we are going to have to overcome as a business, is the inertia of, it's always been this way. It's never worked. Why is this going to work? And so that's why I think the data-driven approach has to be the approach you take, because again, I think CISOs understand that this is a problem. I don't think we have to sell the problem here. I think everyone gets, employees clicking on phishing emails, especially at a certain scale of company, is one of your top risks. But I think that the only way that you get them to address or feel more comfortable that you can train humans out of this is to show them that we have been training humans out of this. So short answer, yeah. I mean, this is something we hear all the time. Long answer is, I think what we've been very good at is weaning companies into our approach. So, we very much take a land and expand strategy where we'll go in, augment a specific part of the program, show them that this is actually making a meaningful difference in the data. And then that becomes a very, very easy business case to make, that you should then start doing doing this in other places, and then eventually, hopefully, take over the entire thing.
I'll unpack the expand part of that, but let's focus on the land part of this.
Yeah.
How are you landing customers in the first place? Like, what's the main channel that you're acquiring customers through?
So far, it has been pretty much exclusively outbound. So emails, LinkedIn, cold calling, which still works, by the way. I was shocked. I didn't think we would get a single meeting booked from cold calls, but shockingly, it still seems to bear fruit, which is amazing.
By the way, who answer phone? Because I know when I get a cold call, I am like the most hostile buyer that you could possibly imagine. But I've heard that from so many guests, from founders I work with, that cold calling works. Who's answering these phones?
You would be surprised. I mean, we get C-level. You'll probably never get the CISO of Disney answering a cold call, but there's a lot of companies out there, and there's a lot of CISOs and a lot of directors who do answer cold calls. And, there's, I think, an art to how you structure a cold call that can maybe put people a little bit more at ease than the traditional, hey, like, buy this thing from me. But, I think we maybe live in a bit of a bubble in the New York, San Francisco ecosystem where we're so used to it that it just immediately turns us off. But there's a lot of people out there, and we've seen a surprising amount of traction from it.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I've heard that from many founders, and that's a good reminder that we do live in a bubble. I seem to forget sometimes, but definitely in a tech bubble here.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, I think I'd cut you off there. So outside of the cold calling, what else is driving growth?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn outreach, meaning we just go out to people on LinkedIn and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Are you interested in having a conversation about it? Similar with email. That's really been it so far. We are now actively experimenting on the inbound. How do we generate leads in from our website? And that's where we've been experimenting a little bit with founder-led marketing. So me posting content on LinkedIn, starting to put some SEO out into the wild. One fun fact, or maybe not so fun fact, is that we, in conjunction with the fundraise, changed name. We used to be called Cypher. We're now Anagram. And along with that, search engine score basically went down to 0. So we've started spending a lot of time on that. But really for us, so far, all the traction has come from either those early customers from cold outreach or referrals. So we started working with company X, and then they said, oh, you should chat with company Y.
Let's unpack the founder-led marketing approach. So I was going through your LinkedIn. There's some good memes there. What's your most popular post so far?
Oh, man. I think my most popular post wasn't even something that I did. I think my most popular post was me posting on LinkedIn a tweet that some other security, professional put on Twitter, or X now, I suppose. But it was a great tweet. It was something about how most, when you talk to the C-level, what they care about is, oh, well, the nation state, like how do we protect ourselves against Russian deep fakes and, nation state actors operating out of, big facilities. And meanwhile, you just fired your whole security team. Your CTO just installed a Google Chrome plugin that lets you see all of your emails in Comic Sans. And just like one of those little observations that was very accurate and kind of puts into perspective the risks of the company that most big enterprises actually face, as opposed to, what they think they face. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the strategy around it, I think that actually within Silicon Valley, there is a really great culture of sort of social posts and social selling and thought leadership and not taking things too seriously. And that's such a cool thing to see. And if you look at security, that really doesn't exist. Like a lot of CISOs come from a military background, a lot of them come from law enforcement, a lot of them will come from legal background. And so, especially with the enterprises we deal with, we mostly focus on the sort of larger, maybe more old school enterprises out there. So, sort of the Pfizers, the Johnson & Johnsons of the world. And those guys, what they see day to day is way less, I'm going to say cutting edge, but, I'll say cutting edge than a lot of what you'll see on tech Twitter or VC Twitter. And so I sort of said, okay, let's see if we can sort of channel that voice and bring it into the security space and kind of post a little bit about what we do. Within security, there is actually a really great social media scene when you get to the kind of non-executive level. So if you look at there's a bunch of really incredibly good pen test influencers, security researchers, and blue teamers, and those guys have incredibly good content, mostly on Twitter, so not really hitting the executives who mostly live on LinkedIn. And so I'm basically trying to bridge that gap.
What about, like, how did it feel when you first decided to go down that path? And the reason I ask, I talk to a lot of founders where I bring up founder-led marketing and they look at it and say, that is cringy. I do not want to be cringy. I don't want to go down that path. I don't want to feel like an influencer. For you, was that a hard decision? Like, did you debate that internally, or what was your thinking?
I very much had that initial reaction. It does feel cringy. I hate most social media things. I can blame it on being British, but I'm not one to usually just throw a bunch of thoughts and ideas out there. So it was very much, an intentional decision to step out of my comfort zone. We ran a bunch of iterations on what does this look like? What is my voice? And eventually we kind of got to something that we were pretty comfortable with. And yeah, I mean, at that point, I just had to bite the bullet and say, you know what, we're going to try this. If it works, amazing. If it doesn't work, I've only lost my pride. And so it was not an immediate decision. I will say, I think it took me a while to get talked into it. But then again, we measured the outcome. We measured how many leads were we generating when I was posting versus when I wasn't posting. And we generated more leads when I was posting. And so we kept doing it.
Was there a specific founder that you were kind of modeling this after or were inspired by?
There's a handful of people. In terms of the sort of memes and the lighter content, I was a big fan of the CEO of PostHog, and I always forget his name. Who is it?
Jamie Hawkins?
Yeah, James Hawkins. Yeah, that's right. So I love his stuff.
It's so good. I don't understand what he's posting. I see some of them and I'm like, I don't understand what the strategy is, but I love the strategy.
I know. And I don't know if it works at all, but but PostHog generally has an incredibly good marketing. Like I love the way that they talk about their product and their customers is very much the vibe that I like. And then, and that was actually where I first found out about James Hawkins, because I love the way that they're thinking about their product. And then I went to his LinkedIn. I was like, oh man, this guy's hilarious. And so that was sort of the channel or the vibe that I wanted to channel as we went in on it.
They have hilarious billboards. I'm sure they're in New York City, but they have amazing ones.
Yeah. No, they have a few in New York as well. Like the billboards are just so good. Yeah. So him. And then, I think there's a few guys on, VCs who have some funnier accounts. The ones who don't take themselves too seriously is what I really like.
I feel like that's the key. I think 5 or 10 years ago, there was this kind of fluffy BS thought leadership of, 5 predictions on the future of security awareness training. I think that's dead. I think they just want to see a banger meme and people want to laugh or be entertained. They don't want the traditional thought leadership.
I think that's right. And that was actually a big realization for me is people don't engage with company content anymore, right? Like we could post a bunch of stuff from the Anagram page and we'll get a handful of clicks on it and that's fine. But 90% of your engagement comes from LinkedIn. And it's interesting because actually, if you look at The challenge with LinkedIn is that it's ephemeral, right? So you're not building SEO or links in the same way that you were when this stuff was living on a blog or somewhere a bit more permanent. So it is, harder, I think, to build up lasting search engine sort of longevity. But I will say, on the other hand, people just don't engage with that anymore.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's what we see as well. What about, when we reflect on this entire journey, the go-to-market journey so far, what do you think's been the most important decision that you've made, and how'd you make that decision?
Oh, man, good question. I will say we started the company about 2 years ago. The biggest decision that we made was pivoting. We started in the security training space. So we were building security training software for security teams, for those professionals. It was a great product. I still think the product was really clever. People really loved it. But we launched it into a market where a lot of companies were doing layoffs. They were kind of keeping their security teams very lean, and very quickly became apparent that the market size just wasn't there for us. And I'm really proud of the fact that we very quickly made the decision to basically throw away all this work that we had done and move into this more general purpose awareness tool, which was something I had in the back of my mind as a natural expansion from what we were doing, but I thought wasn't as interesting a wedge. And it turns out it's actually been a way, way better wedge.
Just a few more questions. I'm seeing that we're over on time now. So I know you just raised your Series A, led by Madrona, a great firm. Talk to us about going from seed to Series A. What was that path like?
So it felt very natural. We made the pivot a little over a year ago to what is now Anagram. And we are thinking, we sort of, in the first 3 months of launching that product, generated more revenue than we had in the past year of selling the first version of the first thing that we had built. And, over the course of 2024, we really spent a lot of time just scrappily getting stuff out the door, getting the product in the hands of users, getting people to give us feedback on it, and sort of hitting, getting towards our first big revenue milestone, which was $1 million of revenue. And that happened about 10, 11 months after we launched. And, I actually was planning on doing our fundraise about now. So sort of March, April, May of 2025. I got connected to Madrona kind of randomly early on. And I took the meeting sort of as a courtesy, just to kind of keep the muscle of how to talk to VCs a little bit stronger, but just really got along with the team there. And, they were exceptional. They ended up sort of coming in and preempting us and saying, hey, look, if you want to do this now, we'll let you skip the process of running a big process. And, I spoke to our insiders, General Catalyst, Bloomberg Beta, said, look, they were happy about it. They wanted to stay involved as well. And so we were able to figure out a round very quickly, which was, I think, pretty, at the time, I wasn't sure if it was the right decision, because I was curious if running a full process was going to add, we could get a slightly higher valuation, we could raise slightly more money. But it felt to me really like, I like this team. 6 months of building the product and getting into market is, worth its weight in gold more than anything else. And I saw when I was a VC so many times companies overraise and overhire and set themselves on a trajectory that they needed to be on in order to hit the valuation that they were at, but they weren't ready to be on at that stage. So we made the call early this year. We closed the round and announced it in, I think it was March, and now we're off to the races.
Final question for you. Let's zoom out. We can go 3 to 5 years into the future, or we can go 10 years into the future. However far out you want to go, what's the big picture vision here for everything that you're building?
Yeah, 10 years from now, I think that we have completely changed the way that people treat human security at work. I think that we don't do these annual or even these monthly training courses anymore. Phishing simulations are a thing of the past. All of this sort of antiquated method of teaching that doesn't actually teach anybody anything is going to go away. And then what's going to replace it is something that's a lot more dynamic and a lot more engaging, something that lives on the machine with the end user and just nudges them in the right direction if it senses that there is something, untoward going on, or if there is an unusual request. And again, I think the key for this software and the key thing that we are bringing in is not necessarily even the technology of detecting these things. I actually think the detection piece is not the hard problem to solve here. I think the hard problem to solve is how do you integrate into a user's workflow in such a way that you're not slowing them down. that they can keep doing their work, they can keep making sales, they can keep writing code, they can keep reviewing contracts, whatever it is, but do it in a way that we can very easily, quickly detect and respond to any kinds of threats. The one piece I can maybe leave you with is just the philosophy of how I think we should think about this space. And that is, if you look at the tools within security that have been the most successful, the tools that everybody uses, the tools that everybody pays a ton of money for, and the tools that people can't afford to lose, right? I would ask CISOs like, hey, if your budget was cut by 80% tomorrow, what would you keep? No one was saying security awareness. Everybody was saying, well, I would keep my antivirus software. I would keep my detection and response, CrowdStrike, whatever it is. But the common theme was that idea of detection and response. They needed to be able to detect if something was going on and then respond to it. Currently, security awareness training is neither detection nor response. It doesn't fit into that framework in any way, shape, or form. And so our approach is very much focused on let's detect that something is maybe wrong and let's respond in real time and try and prevent users from making that mistake or clicking on that link or answering that email. And I think that once you start looking at things in that way, all of a sudden, this becomes one of the sort of 3 to 4 foundational tools that you need as a security organization, just focused on your humans.
Amazing. Well, that's where we're going to leave it. Before we wrap here, if there's any founders listening in that just want to follow along with this go-to-market journey, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm just LinkedIn/in/Harley Sugarman. I think I'm the only one on the planet. And follow our company on LinkedIn. Our website is anagramsecurity.com. Pretty much it.
Amazing. Appreciate you taking the time. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Likewise.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.